In this video, we're going to start building our asset showcase so that you guys can keep track of all your assets. Let's get started. Okay, so I'm starting this video by showing you the end result, which is a fairly bland looking scene, but a scene nonetheless, where I've gone and dropped in every asset that we currently have in the game. I've divided it up in a fairly arbitrary manner at the moment. I've got castle over here, village over there, foliage, nature stuff, and enemies and characters all the way over here. And there's no real particular rhyme or reason on how I've done it. I'm just doing it how feels good at the moment. So first question of why would we want to do this? Well, for me, when I've got my level design hat on, I'd like to know what are all the assets at my disposal. And when I'm interacting with our art team, I want to know what's changed, what's changing, what they're working on, what's coming next. If I import an asset pack, then I want to be able to put that asset pack next to my existing assets to see if they work together. And sometimes if I've got all these assets in Rick's village, as I do at the moment, and we go and get a whole bunch of new things, then maybe those new things are going to be in a different scene, a different level, a different part of our game, and I might not see them side by side and see whether there's a good harmonious relationship. So let me take you through the process of how I created this. Pretty straightforward. You guys know how to make scenes now and create a new scene. So I'm just in, I've actually sorted by scene here. I'm going to stop that, go down into my levels, which is where we're putting all of our levels, and part of level is the scene that comprises it. We will go to create scene. I'm going to call my scene, I've called it showcase, the one that is my proper one. I'm going to create one now just to work through the process with you guys, which is showcase temp. Okay, so that we know we need to get rid of it. Open that up. Now, when you first come in, you'll see, as with any empty scene in Unity, it's pretty empty. We've got just a camera and a light, but I still have all my assets here, which is very excellent. First thing to do is to drop in a new terrain. Create a terrain over here. Okay, that's great. Now, let me spare you guys. I've done a lot of messing around with this in terms of what I think would work best. I'm going to take you straight to my results rather than giving you a challenge of trying to figure it out, because it was probably 2 or 3 hours of me going through this process. I want to spare you guys that. I'm going to start off by making the terrain width 512 by 512, and I'll explain why I do that in a moment, but it's basically so that I know that my grids line up in a nice uniform manner. The overall detailed resolution 1024, the base texture resolution 1024. As you know, when we create a new terrain, we need to change its position to 100 on the minus 100, wrong way around, on the y-axis, and then we go into our paint height tool, set that to 100 and click flatten, boink, and up it goes, flatten. So that if we needed to have any dips in there, that's probably too small a brush to make that make sense. Need to have any dips in there, then we can lower it if need be. Probably don't really need to do that in the showcase, but something we need to be mindful of nonetheless. It's good to have that as our practice. Now, those of you who are hardcore programmers might wish to have your top left point of your terrain at 0, 0. That is not a problem at all. For me, that makes my brain go a little bit crazy. I just can't handle it. I can't handle the 0, 0 top left because it leaves me no room to put things above and below that. And if we add things into the scene that don't have a position, they're going to end up at 0, 0. And if we do that, I'm getting this spot where it's not really on my terrain and I have to interact with there. And it creates my focal point up there. And then the amount of space that we can connect with up there is limited. So that's a long way of saying I put my 0, 0 in the middle. That way we can have a center point. I can put my player in the middle. They can run left. They can run right. It's not a case of always having to run the whole way through. And as you saw on mine, I had this big highlighted bit in the middle that said this is basically the center point. So what I'm going to do is create the position. If we go half of our 512, it's going to be minus 256. Minus 256. That's pretty good. So then the center point is going to be right about here. Let me see if I can get a nicer looking blob. No, that's not nicer. Anyway, right in the middle here, which creates a little bit of a problem because we're not starting right up here on the top left. We're kind of starting in the middle of the Unity natural grid. And I'm a little bit OCD. I want to have these things all line up nice and neat. So we'll get to that in a second, because what I'm going to do now is apply a texture. I've given textures to you guys that have grids on them that be associated with this lecture. You'll be able to find that. Let me see if I can find it in here. Let me use my newfangled approach, searching for texture, and then we'll also type in grid. That should give me, yes, wonderful, look at that. Now, every scene that you have in Unity, you need to reset up your textures. So I'm going to add textures. I'm just going to do a couple of these for now, the green, and I want this to be 10 by 10 in terms of size. I want it to be accurate. I've set this up, it's a 256 texture, with my goal here is to have the grid line up exactly with the distances that we have in Unity. So I want one grid to equal 10 units, basically. And the way that I was testing that, and you can see here it's not quite lining up, which kind of bugged me a little bit. The way I tested that is to add in a cube. The cube has gone, let's reset the cube to its 0 point. Well, that didn't quite work. There we go, 0 point. Double click on the cube. So you see the cube, this is right in the middle, which is the way I like it, right in the middle, as opposed to resetting it and having it up there, which I've said to you guys. And you can see it's sort of in the middle, but not quite, and that bugged me. So what I did for my texture was for my terrain, I moved it. So it didn't start at negative 256, which is half of our 512. It started at negative 250, and then it's bam, right in the middle. So that becomes our 0 origin point here is nice and neatly. There'll be a little bit of weird overhang over here, but that's fine. We're not hanging out over there anywhere near as much as we're hanging out over here. If I click back on my cube, let's have a look at the cube here. I will change its scale to 10 and 10. And by doing that, I should be able to place it right there. If I do it accurately rather than just dragging it 5 and 5, and then you can see that we've got exactly, each grid point is 10 units along, which is great. That gives me a secondary benefit of what I can do. If I go and create another texture in here of white, let's chuck in a white, you'll see why this was a lot of me diddling around to try to get this in a way that matched what I wanted it to do. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day if your grid isn't exactly precise, but I don't know, I wanted to start having it precise. Because of the way we've got it set up here, because we've got the size of our terrain with a 512 of the terrain, what it does is creates nice and neat click on white, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Exactly 10 units, 10 by 10 that we've got in our grid. So I like that. It all matches up very nicely. Now, interestingly, if you guys go down and say, well, I want a gigantic terrain, what if I start by doubling it? So I will do 1024 as the width and 1024 as the length. An interesting thing that happens when you do that is, jump back up here to painting, is that at a one brush size, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in essence, what it has done has given us less fidelity of being able to paint textures, which you might not mind in this showcase. But for me, I want to be able to nicely do boxes around individual assets. Not that that's a nice box around an asset. And the assets tend not to be gigantic like that. If we're looking at a wheelbarrow, then I want to be able to get paint underneath a wheelbarrow without having to have a huge space to do that. Also, if I want to write a little message to Mikey or something, if I want to do a tick, well done, or any of that kind of stuff, I just wanted to have that fidelity on my texture, which is a good note as well. If you're making a new level, a new scene, I'd recommend not having any more size on your terrain than you really need, because you lose that fidelity. I think the village that we've got at the moment is, the terrain is probably a little bit bigger than we needed, but we didn't know how big the level was going to be, so we made it that level as a starting point. But there is a value in having your terrain size as small as possible, because then you get a lot more fidelity when you paint. And because I've created these textures as grids for you, each of them have grid lines on them. It doesn't read super clearly on there, but I've put grid lines on the outside. It means that even if I paint white over the top of here, it's going to retain the grid lines in exactly the same place. So it not as clear here, but that's actually, the white texture has grey grid lines on it. And if I go and grab the Under levels, I actually put it in the showcase. I've got in here, if I go and create a blue one, add texture. Make sure you make this 10 by 10. I could make it 1 by 1, and that would have tiny little grids. And then if I paint blue, see how the grid line again is in exactly the same spot. So I find that really useful. I can keep the grid lines without having to rely on these Unity grid lines that kind of get dulled out quite a lot once we get a texture in there. So this whole system, it all lines up very nicely. Quite happy with that. As I said, you could go for a 1 by 1 if you wanted. Let's just have a quick look at what that's going to do for us. 1 by 1 and 1 by 1 and apply. So you can see how it gives it a real fine detail, which is possibly a good thing to do if you wanted to go in and have smaller, like an area where you're doing smaller assets, placing them, and you wanted to have smaller grids in there, then you can totally do that. You could even duplicate the blue and have 2 different types of blue. So lots of ways to do it if you want to have that smaller. That actually looks pretty good. I might steal that idea. Hadn't done that before. Excellent. That's the first part of it. Next part of it is in terms of creating a little bit of a layout that's meaningful for you. So I just went and painted. I'm going to do this really fast. You do it, take your time if you want. I just painted some areas, up this way and that way, and said, here's where particular things go. I haven't written things on the ground, but I could very easily write up here, put an E for enemies. I like this fast and loose. You guys know from when we were doing our commenting in our levels, and up here we might have like nature. I like just to be able to go bloom, and there we go. It's very, very quick and easy. Someone might come in and say, nope, don't want to call it nature anymore. Let's just scribble it out there. And so, yeah, it's pretty cool. Okay, and the other thing, before I go back into my nice, neater showcase, is the placement. So if we go into, grab our objects, if I sort by prefab, now I can click up at the highest level, highlight everything, and drag it all over here into the hierarchy. It's going to place every single thing in the world. Now, what's really cool is I've already gone and placed all these things in a particular position, and it's brought in a sun as well, so the lighting's gone a little bit wacky. There's a few things that I don't really want to bring in. Let me just get rid of this new sun that it's created. Okay, but you can see that I can go into a new scene and drop it all down instantly, and there we go. I've got all my nice, neat layout. Everything's perfect. I'm not going to lose assets by doing that. If anything was to happen in my showcase, I can recreate them and get them all back pretty easily. And the way that we do this is when you have a prefab, let's go in and create we'll just do a duplicate of the wooden watchtower, duplicate that. Okay, and you can see the old one has a starting transform of 2342, so the new one will have that as well. If I go and change this to 0, like revert it back to nothing, and then dropping this into the scene, I can put it wherever I want, dropping it into the hierarchy. Let me condense all this. Let me just grab all this stuff and get rid of it. We don't need that for the moment. Dropping it in the hierarchy, it'll go to 0, 0. There's 0, 0 on the point there. My little thingy is a little bit misleading. Right in the middle there. And that's fine, but if I do that with 50 things and they're all in the middle, then this whole process of they're on top of each other and where are they, what's going on. If I now drag that over to where I would like it in relation to the rest of my assets, and I like having these somewhat neat and tidy, so 18 and minus 15. For example, make sure that it's at the right 0 point, so I get that consistency. I hit apply, and now that new wooden watchtower is always going to be in that position when I instantiate it through the hierarchy. The old one, if I've done this correctly, is going to be back at its other location. So that's how you can do that. So if I wanted to say, oh, I need to move some new stuff in here, that guy's going to be positioned over here now, then I'll go and apply that into the scene. Let's go back now to our the main showcase that I'd created before. You can see if we go and find that new object that I just created. What was that? It was a tower, watchtower. It was wooden tower number 1. It was the second one. Drag into the hierarchy. bloom, it's over there in the spot that we created it, which is really cool. So at any point in time, as I showed before, if we drag everything into the scene, then they'll all be in their nice natural spot, exactly where they're supposed to be. So that's a big benefit. That another benefit, as we've talked about before, is I can have a conversation with the art guys and say, okay, this is our current nature, our current trees. We need some more trees. Can you guys make some? If they make some, then it's up to us. We haven't figured it out yet. They might put it in there and you know, just let me duplicate that. They might just start adding them in here, and I can see, oh, there's some new stuff in there. Or more likely, they would probably put it down in here so that I can see here's a new thing that needs to be placed in our area. That's why I've created these lanes. These lanes is an opportunity for me to say, you know what, this guy here, I think he needs some work. I can put it into the lane, so that becomes our area of conversation. We're not fishing around in our various places to try to find stuff. If Mikey wants to bring something to my attention, he might say, I've put a new thing on this fountain, put it in there, and I can see it in there pretty easily. And then, you know, I can move it back and forth, and that's pretty straightforward. So over to your challenge, you guessed it, create your asset showcase, create a new scene, and in that scene, to place terrain, add a grid or similar texture. I'll provide you those simple textures that I made with grids on them. Do whatever you like. I'd recommend having it flat and not putting in sort of a lot of crazy terrain. You can have it just as a flat ground plane. You can have it as whatever you like, my friends. This is entirely your project. I'm just showing you the process that we're going through. And, you know, a lot of this we're figuring out as we go, and it's going to change depending upon what our needs are. Then what I'd like you to do is to place all of your prefabs that you currently have, whether it's stuff that we've given you, stuff that you've made yourself, stuff from Asset Store, and apply back to the transforms once you've placed it so that you know they will be in a specific place, and you know you can always find it. And if you need to, you can recreate that asset showcase instantly by dragging everything back into the hierarchy. There's one last thing I wanted to show you just before we go, and that is, for me, I was wondering, okay, so you've put these things into the scene, you've clicked apply. What's something, okay, the fire pit, you've clicked apply, it's got certain transform, etc. But what's going to happen when we've already got that placed in a scene? So while I'm jumping into my scene, have a think about that. What is the impact going to be on the fire pit that we've currently got placed? Because I just applied all this stuff back to the prefab. And the answer is, you clever people have already guessed it, is that nothing happens to the transform, to the positioning of the fire pit that I've already instantiated. It lives where it lives. If I was to change any of the other details, the textures and so on, then it would instantly update. But the transform, it stays where it is on this instance. However, if I was to go and find in World Objects, I'll find the fire pit. Fire pit, there we go. Look for the prefab. If I was to drag it in, it'll go wherever I want it to go. If I drag it into my hierarchy, it will go to whatever the position, let's see if we can find it, whatever the position is that it lives in our showcase, which is somewhere over here. And that doesn't matter. This is important from a showcase point of view. And now we can just go and drag it over to here and give it its particular placement in this scene, which is fine. It'll change its new position. If we go back and create another one into the hierarchy, it's going to be back in that origin point that we've decided for it as part of the showcase. So I just wanted to close the loop on that in case you guys are, as I was, a little bit worried that I was going to do something that might undo my good work. But in terms of applying these particular changes back, it's not a problem. So back to the challenge. Here's the challenge for you guys. Over to you. Set that up. This is something that's going to be very good organization and very important as we start to get more and more and more assets into our game. This is a big game, so we've got to plan properly for it. And you guys are doing fantastic. Thanks for all the discussions. Thanks for all the comments. Thanks for all the questions. And I will be seeing you in a future video.